Imagine waking up one morning and finding Jesus sitting at the edge of your bed, scrolling through your For You page, not judging, not lecturing, just quietly watching. Watching the memes, the edits, the drama, the arguments, the comparisons, the insecurities, the highlights, the lows, the comments you forgot you wrote. And then he looks at you, not with disappointment, but with a question. Why do you give so much of your heart to this? Deep down, many of us already feel that tension. Social media is the place where we live a second life, a place where we're constantly performing, constantly explaining ourselves, constantly trying to feel something that lasts longer than 10 seconds. But if Jesus walked into that world, into the apps we open more often than our Bibles, more often than we talk to our friends, more often than we rest, what would he think? Today, we're diving into that question, not to preach, not to shame, but to explore, to think, to reflect on what all this scrolling is doing to our souls, and what timeless wisdom might look like in a world built on likes, shares, and digital validation. Because this isn't a video about deleting your apps, it's about understanding your heart in the middle of them. If Jesus stepped into our world today, he wouldn't show up with a flip phone or pretend social media doesn't exist. The Jesus of Scripture steps into culture, not away from it. He met people where they were, in markets, on roads, in villages, at wells, among crowds. He told stories using the language people understood: soil, farming, coins, sheep, tables, lamps. If he arrived in 2025, he'd meet people in the digital spaces where they spend their lives. Not to go viral, but to meet hearts that are quietly breaking behind curated feeds. So let's imagine Jesus opening Instagram or TikTok. The first thing he'd probably notice isn't the platform itself, but the people behind it. The ones who built their whole identity on the idea that being seen equals being loved. The ones chasing numbers because chasing peace feels impossible. The ones who feel connected to everyone, yet lonely with everyone. Jesus consistently cared about the condition of the heart. He wasn't distracted by the surface-level behaviors. He always looked deeper. When people sought status, he talked about humility. When they were anxious, he talked about trust. When they performed for approval, he talked about intention. And if he scrolled through endless feeds today, he'd likely whisper the same question he asked 2,000 years ago. What are you actually seeking? One of the most famous moments in the Gospels is when Jesus meets a woman drawing water from a well. She's not looking for truth. She's looking for something to quench the emptiness inside her. And Jesus tells her, in the simplest words, whoever drinks from this well will be thirsty again. Let's be real. Social media is our modern well. We come back to it again and again and again, looking for validation, looking for distraction, looking for comfort, looking for escape. And it works, temporarily. A good comment hits like a drop of cold water. A viral post feels like rain. A message from someone you care about feels like a waterfall, but the thirst always returns. Jesus wasn't talking about water that day. He was talking about the human cycle of craving something deeper than the world can give. Something social media can't deliver, no matter how many followers, views, or perfectly edited posts we stack up. And he wasn't condemning her desire, he was redirecting it. If he saw our social media habits today, he'd probably do the same. Not telling us to stop wanting to be seen or understood, but asking, why do you come here for what only real connection can give you? Let's talk identity, because if there's one thing social media thrives on, it's shaping who we think we are. We see it everywhere. People tying their worth to numbers, people reinventing themselves for attention, people collapsing when the algorithm shifts, people comparing their bodies, their lifestyles, their relationships to someone else's curated highlight reel. And the irony, the more we try to prove ourselves, the less we remember who we are. In the Bible, Jesus meets countless people who have lost themselves, tax collectors hated by everyone, fishermen overlooked by society, outcasts judged by their past. And his message is always the same. You are more than what the world says you are. Think about that for a moment. Social media says you are what performs well. Jesus says you are who I created you to be. Social media says your value changes with numbers. Jesus says your value is constant. Social media says become what people want. Jesus says become who you were always meant to be. If Jesus saw how many people feel pressured to change their personalities, beliefs, or bodies to be accepted, he wouldn't respond with harsh criticism. He'd respond the same way he did in the Gospels, with compassion and truth, with a reminder that your identity doesn't need a filter, a trend, or a viral moment to be worth something. But it's not all negative. If Jesus walked through the digital world today, there's a lot he'd appreciate. Social media isn't only a source of anxiety or comparison, it's also a source of creativity, connection, and storytelling, things Jesus deeply valued. He told stories that traveled across towns and generations, stories that resonated with ordinary people and challenged powerful ones, stories that crossed boundaries, cultures, and time. And what is social media, if not the world's largest storytelling platform? There are people sharing hope, people building communities, people lifting others up, people using their gifts in ways that reach millions. Jesus wouldn't dismiss that. He'd celebrate the good. He'd probably encourage people to use their platforms not for perfection, but for truth, vulnerability, service, kindness. He'd see the creativity and joy people bring to their feeds and say, this can be used for good. And then he'd ask, but is it shaping you more than you're shaping it? Because Jesus cared deeply about influence, not in the modern sense of followers and brand deals, but in the real sense of how something forms your heart and character. Let's look at something else Jesus talked about: secrecy. In Matthew 6, he says, when you do something good, don't announce it with trumpets. Don't do things just to be seen. Not because being seen is bad, but because intention matters. In the age of social media, intention is everything. Two people can post the same thing: a picture, a prayer, a story, and one does it from the heart while the other does it for applause. Jesus wouldn't say, stop posting. He'd say, be honest with yourself. He'd ask, are you sharing because it's meaningful or because you're craving validation? Are you creating because it's your gift or because you fear being ignored? Today, more than ever, we confuse attention for love, engagement for impact, and visibility for value. Jesus constantly challenged those assumptions. He often did his most meaningful actions away from crowds. He valued quiet sincerity over loud performance. In a world where every moment can be posted, he'd remind us that some of the most sacred moments are meant to stay unposted, not because they're not good enough for the feed, but because they're too precious for it. Now let's talk about the way social media affects our relationships. It connects us instantly, but also makes genuine connection harder. People misunderstand each other in comment sections. People cancel each other over mistakes. People lose empathy because everything becomes content. People argue more with strangers than they talk to their real friends. Jesus consistently taught patience, forgiveness, and empathy, not softness, but strength. The kind of strength that listens before reacting, understands before assuming, loves before judging. Imagine Jesus reading a heated comment thread. Imagine him watching someone get ratioed or cancelled. Imagine him seeing how easily we dehumanize someone we disagree with. He wouldn't defend harmful behavior, but he also wouldn't celebrate destruction. He'd say the same thing. He told the people who wanted to throw stones, look at your own heart first. Jesus didn't ignore conflict. He addressed it with wisdom, grounding, and compassion, qualities social media desperately needs but rarely rewards. He'd challenge us to be different, to slow down, to speak with intention, to treat people as people, not profiles. There's another big issue: anxiety. Studies show social media increases stress, comparison, FOMO, and fear of not being enough. Jesus talked about anxiety more than almost any topic, not in a dismissive way, but in a deeply human way. Do not worry about tomorrow, he said, not because tomorrow doesn't matter, but because constant fear steals the joy of today. If Jesus saw how many of us check our phones before we even check how we feel, if he saw how many of us compare ourselves before we even brush our teeth, if he saw how many of us can't sit in silence because silence forces us to face our thoughts, he'd speak the same words he spoke to a storm on the sea: peace, be still. Not be perfect, not be productive, but be still. Stillness is something the algorithm can't give you, but without it, your soul gets loud in all the wrong ways. So what would Jesus actually think about social media? He wouldn't say it's evil. He wouldn't say delete everything. He wouldn't say avoid it. He'd say what he always said: let your heart lead, not your hunger. He'd see the laughter, creativity, connection, and beauty in these platforms. He'd also see the loneliness, pressure, comparison, and exhaustion. And he'd remind us that the digital world is powerful, so powerful that we must be intentional with how we use it. Jesus wouldn't ask you to disappear from social media. He'd ask you to show up differently, to post with purpose instead of insecurity, to consume without losing yourself, to connect with empathy instead of competition, to rest without guilt, to be present in real life, not just online. He'd remind you that the world may measure you by numbers, but he measures you by your heart. He'd remind you that followers fade, trends fade, relevance fades, but character doesn't. He'd remind you that peace isn't found by refreshing your feed, but by refreshing your soul. And he'd remind you that your value has never, not once, depended on a platform. Maybe the real question isn't, what would Jesus think about social media? Maybe the real question is, How is social media shaping who I'm becoming and who I was created to be? Technology isn't going away. The digital world isn't slowing down. But you don't have to let it define you. You can choose to be intentional. You can choose to slow down. You can choose to create with authenticity. You can choose to consume with awareness. You can choose to value connection over validation. You can choose to guard your heart, even while scrolling. Because Jesus wouldn't tell you to run from the world. He'd tell you to walk through it with wisdom. And maybe that's the message we need most today.